Okay. All right. So, hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's presentation. As Carol said, my name is Joanna Botvin, and I'm going to start sharing my screen in a little bit, but I just want to share that I'm super excited to be sharing with you all about Syntropic Agroforestry. This is something that I've been deeply learning for about 2 years in travels and studying with different communities um, and working on these types of systems. And I've just seen such incredible abundance. I've seen pieces of degraded land with no water have water come back, rivers come back. And so it's really incredible to be able to come and teach everything that I've put my heart and soul into learning. And so thank y'all for being here tonight. And I'm gonna share my screen. And right here. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Mm-hmm. We can see
Okay,
it.
perfect. So a little bit about me. Carol introduced me already, but again, I'm Joanna, and I have two businesses that I currently run. And Just Bloom Gardens, I do regenerative landscaping, which I'm now applying a lot of this syntropic systems into landscaping. And Coralma Botanica, which where I make organic, homegrown, and wildcrafted herbal remedies. And a little bit about my mission, which ties into what we're going to be learning today, is to help humans remember that we're part of a deeply intelligent ecosystem and that we play a crucial and positive role within it. Also, to plant as many gardens as possible in my lifetime. And a little bit about this is that I want to touch on the word sustainability. It's used a lot in the permaculture world. And I want to challenge that and say, we are 15 steps behind sustainability, right? We don't really want to sustain what's going on with everything that we see happening in the world, but especially in the farming world, right? There's a lot of damage, there's a lot of soil erosion and contamination. And so, what we want to do now, my humble opinion, is that we want to move forward from sustainability, and beyond that we want to regenerate, right, by planting, propagating, educating, and really regenerating these pieces of land and the earth itself, where we have unfortunately done a lot of damage. So a little bit about what we're going to be touching on today. Of course, Syntropic Agroforestry, the origin, the key concepts, design, and then the pruning and the maintenance, and a lot of things in between. So regenerative agriculture, permaculture, agroforestry, syntropy, right? There's all these terms that are being thrown around nowadays. And I just want to clarify a little bit because I know that it can be a lot of words and a lot of fluff. And so the main differences between organic farming, agroforestry, permaculture, syntropic agroforestry, they all fall under regenerative agriculture, right? Permaculture itself is an umbrella term for ways of thinking, for a systems perspective, right? It includes the agricultural aspect, but it also includes water catchment and bioconstruction and a lot of different ways of systems thinking, right? It's a broader term. Syntropic agroforestry is within permaculture, a part of permaculture. Now, organic farming is still, you can still be farming in a monocrop way using organic inputs, right? And agroforestry, we can have two crops and still have agroforestry, right? We can have a monoculture of pine and we can have strawberries growing underneath, and that would still be an agroforestry system, right? So syntropic agroforestry really is about successional planting. It's about creating systems of abundance. And y'all are going to hear me say this tonight a lot, systems of abundance. And again, it falls into the permaculture world, but it is not exactly permaculture, right? It's a part of permaculture. And and part of the main focus of regenerative agriculture in all these systems, right, is that we have been extracting more than we have been returning to the soil. And so changing that mindset and how can we practice that? That's where syntropic agroforestry comes in, right? It's instead of extraction, it is how can we truly give back what we take? And that's what I believe is a really important solution to a lot of the ecological problems that we see in the world. So where it all started, syntropic agroforestry or syntropic farming or syntropic agriculture, it's really all the same thing, except sometimes with agroforestry we use trees, and in syntropic agriculture trees don't always have to be a part of it. But this term was coined by Ernst Gosch. He was a Swiss geneticist, researcher, and farmer who studied. He lived in Brazil for about 45 years, and in the 80s um, he started to really study the succession in these tropical forests in Bahia in Brazil, and he applied these rhythms of nature and these sequences into a farming system that deeply enhances rather than depletes the earth's resources. And so in the 333 acres of land that he bought 40 years later, there started to be natural springs that came back. And now it is one of the largest production forests in the world. And so he really showed the world kind of this new way of farming that took the concepts of nature and applied it to a system that really works and that brings back that abundance, right? And so since then he has replicated and taught people all over the world, and now there's a lot of farms, which I have visited many of them in Mexico, in Costa Rica, right, that are applying these concepts to really bring back abundance. And again, he coined the term, much like permaculture, right? The concepts in a lot of these farming practices are not necessarily new. They are indigenous wisdom that are in practice and um, that are put into systems that people can then replicate and teach others, right? But they were not originally all original ideas, right? So this is indigenous wisdom that we have, the indigenous people and the societies that have planted in this way to think. Um, and so some of the principles in general, and we're going to go deeper into these as the night goes on, are mainly, and you'll see some similarities with food forests in permaculture. It is different than food forests and permaculture, and we're going to get into those differences. But a lot of the concepts are probably some things, if you've been in the permaculture world, and if you've studied food forests, and if you've been to some of our talks in the past, they're not completely new, but some things are very specific to syntropic agriculture. So the main thing is soil coverage, right? Organic material, biomass production. In these systems, we are producing our own biomass. We're producing our own compost, and we plant intentionally for that. We're maximizing photosynthesis with different levels and different layers. So we're going to get into this again deeper, but stratification is where plants are arranged by light needs. Okay? Just remember that. Again, we're going to go into it. Natural succession is a really important part of these systems. And this is how we manage plant growth from initial to climax stage. And we manage and we plant intentionally to speed up the natural succession, that such as happens in nature, right? We are now creating this, it happens slowly, and we are just making it happen at an accelerated rate. Synchronization, so harvesting, pruning. Pruning is a really big part of these syntropic systems. And the management, high intensity management. So there has to be somebody dedicated to manage these types of systems, because it is different in that way than the food forest, because food forests often, right, they're planted and they're growing, and it's often this idea that like, oh, I can just leave my food forest to be and come back just to harvest, and there's not much management that needs to be done. However, in syntropic agroforestry, there is a high intensity management. And then the north to south rows is not always, it doesn't always happen, but it is common. Seeding, biomass organization, right? Pruning, overweeding. So there's not a lot of weeding that has to be done in these systems because of the huge amount of biomass that is produced. And high density planting. So again, we're planting, thinking in abundance. And so just I just want to touch on photosynthesis because I know even though we're all in the plant world, we sometimes forget about the magic of photosynthesis. It's a word that we learned, in middle school biology, and it's kind of like, yeah, we know it happens, but if we really think about it, plants have this ability, right, to take energy from the sun, they take sunlight, and they transform it into food for themselves. So we're taking energy literally from the stars, bringing it down to the earth, and the plants are then giving themselves the nutrients that they require, right, from this. And so this is magic, right? And in these systems, we think about photosynthesis in a way of we want to maximize photosynthesis for these plants. So the more that we harvest, the more that we prune, the more shoots and the more new leaves that are created, then the more opportunity that these plants have for creating energy for themselves and food, right? So thinking about storing energy, and this is the essence of syntropy, right? It's storing and maintaining our energy. I don't mean in the woo woo sense, literal, like sunlight, right? Energy, water, right? Maintaining these inside of our system so that we can have um, more abundance, more food. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into ecological succession. This is a really important part because we're planting with this knowledge, right? Of this is what happens in nature, and we are intentionally recreating it in these systems. So I in my in-person classes, I ask this question to my audience, but here you all are on Zoom. So if anybody does want to answer, or you want to write in the chat, or you want to share, you can comment in the chat. But what happens after a disturbance in nature, right? So a fire, explosion, heavy tilling, right? What happens? Does anybody want to share? I know you see it on the screen, but the earth is bare, right? But is it totally bare? Usually, no, right? There are seed banks, there are weeds, right? There are weeds that either fly in or that they're still in the soil. And these weeds are the first sign, right, after a disturbance of the earth trying to heal itself. In Spanish, these are called malezas, which means the bad ones. And it's really pretty crazy because in a lot of all over the world, in a lot of languages, the way that we talk about them, the way that we see them, even in permaculture settings, right? Even people that are more conscious about plants, it's like they're so obnoxious, like, oh, these weeds, and they're just taking over my yard. And they are the most amazing protective allies that the earth has, right? The earth is a body that is trying to heal. And that's what the weeds are doing. They are healing, they are covering, right? They are protecting. So their function is to firstly cover soil, because the earth, soil should always be covered. And I'm sure a lot of y'all know that here, people that are in the gardening world, right? Soil should be covered. And it's it's funny because when it isn't, we sometimes in gardens, if there's just bare soil, it looks nice, whatever, but we never see bare soil in forests, right? In nature, where there is the most diversity, where there is the most resilience, the soil is always covered. So that's the function of weeds, right? Covering soil. Also water retention, right? They're creating structure for the soil, holding the soil, so it loosens compacted soil, it holds soil in place. It's bringing in microorganisms, right? It's making minerals available for other plants. Weeds are really incredible, in the way that they also often they are medicinal plants too. So what they often do for us and our bodies medicinally for humans, they often do the same thing for the soil. For example, plantain, right? Plantain works on our kidneys. It works on our water systems in our bodies. So it brings water into our bodies. It's very moistening, right? And it often does this. It helps the earth filter and bring in water as well. Yarrow, medicinally, is a plant that brings down our temperature, and it cools us down when we have a fever. And it does this to pieces of land that are overheating and are very dry and need a lower temperature in order to be more productive. So it's really amazing how these plants have very similar functions for our bodies than they do for the earth. And through them, through these weeds, we can also learn a lot about our soil condition, right? So the pH, nutrient deficiencies, right? The different weeds that pop up give us different messages about what our soil is needing. And yeah, so they are really the nurses of life on Earth. And it's interesting because my one of my teachers who is really has been studying syntropic agroforestry for almost 20 years. She said something that really stuck with me, and that it's that we have the same thought about ourselves that we do about weeds, right? We think that we often don't really have a function here, right? Humans are kind of seen as this, like, why are we here if we're just damaging things, right? Why are we here? We have a negative mindset about ourselves as humans in general. And these types of systems and this way of thinking in abundance has really challenged that for me, and also in saying we were also created by nature, so we must have a function in this system, right? Positive function. I'm talking about ecologically, right? So we must have a function in this system. And humans, the scientific name for humans, the Latin name for humans is sapiens sapiens. So we think that we think. And so using this, right, it's interesting. How can we utilize our power to think in a positive way, um, and comprehend that our inherent function in this world is to potentialize and to accelerate processes, whether they're positive or negative. So how can we comprehend these processes and accelerate them in a positive way, right? And so that's what these systems in their essence kind of have taught me, and that's what really they're about, is about we're process potentializers. So let's use our ability to do so, right? So the first stage of these syntropic systems is the placenta, right? So all of the plants, I will say, in these systems are planted at the same time. Okay, so I'm talking about the initial stage, early succession plants that are going to be planted at the same time as our trees in these systems, right? And that's how we're accelerating these processes, right? We're planting everything at the same time, and we're saying now we're going to manage the system in a way that's going to be beneficial for us and for the plants. So the placenta stage is the initial early stage. So this is zero, and there's two, placenta 1 and placenta 2. So these are annuals and perennials that are either from 0 to 6 months or 6 months to 2 years. This is what's going to be called our placenta stage. Okay. And in the placenta, right, this is where life is generated, right? This is the creation of life. So this is the way to see this first stage, is these are plants that are going to be helping our system start to really thrive. These are the weeds of our system, right? So, but we're intentionally planting weeds that happen to be annuals that we're also going to eat, medicinal plants that we're also going to use, right? And some of these are also going to be biomass producers that these systems are planted very, very densely, so that whatever we don't harvest for our consumption, we harvest for biomass and leaving it there for decomposition of the system, of the plant, for the soil, right? So some examples of placenta 1 plants, the initial weeds of our system that are going to be our annuals: cilantro, basil, chamomile, right? Epazote, dandelion, calendula, marigolds, plantains, hibiscus, right? So a lot of these plants have a very, very short life cycle. They don't always go up to 6 months, right? 0 to 6 months. So for example, basil, really its life cycle is really 40 days. But we cut the flowers and we cut the tops of the plant to make it last longer. But something else that these types of systems really teach us is to let go, right? That attachment is really a human characteristic, and there is no attachment in nature. So cutting these plants back when it's their time to go, when they have lived up to their potential, and when they have been at their maximum production stage, not extending their life so that they're kind of like on life support, right? We're helping them stay alive, but really their greatest potential was done at their time, and that's when we harvest them. So knowing the life cycle of the plants and knowing when they are at their prime is really important as well. Placenta 2, these are going to be more some perennials here, and they have a little bit more structure, right? So typically the herbs have a little bit more, their characteristic is that they have a lot of seed, they put out a lot of flowers, right? They grow very rapidly. So they're kind of taking over, they're retaking the systems. And then our perennials within the placenta stage are going to have a little bit more structure, but they still have those characteristics of fast growing. They have a lot of flower, they put down a lot of seed, right? And so knowing when to harvest these and their life cycles is really crucial, because these are the early succession plants, right? So these are not, something to keep in mind is that these are not always going to be part of our system. We're going to get into the stratification, but these are typically plants that have a really high light requirement. So they're high strata. So as we're planting these at the same time as our trees, as I mentioned, right? So as our trees are growing, these are going to be shaded out. And eventually, that's why sometimes they're annuals that naturally they have a life cycle of one season, or they're perennials that we get to then choose who stays and who goes once our system has provided, doesn't have the light requirements that they need anymore. So then we have our intermediary plants, which again are planted at the same time, with specific spacing. And these are from between 2 to 15 years. So typically our fruit trees are planted in during this time, during this section. All of our fruit trees usually, 2 to 15 years, right? That's kind of when they're at their most productive stage. They can live longer, or shorter, but we want to think about what's their most productive time of their life, right? And so, of course, these have a lot more lignin. They're stronger. They're going to be either bigger shrubs or trees that are going to last anywhere between 2 to 15 years. So here's a list that y'all can take a look at. And this is where we see the accumulation stage, right? And at this stage of our system, we already have our biomass plants, our biomass producers that we're going to be pruning and feeding and protecting our trees, right? So we're going to talk about the trees that we're choosing for our systems at the end of the presentation. But then I just want to touch here on the mature or the late succession trees. These are going to be large trees that live up to 300 years. And eventually the system gets to this stage of abundance where these are the trees that we have been nurturing up to this point to have a really, really abundant system, right? Where their canopy still lets enough light for the understory, but a lot of our placenta 1, placenta 2 plants have phased out by this time. And these systems, syntropic agriculture, syntropic agroforestry, syntropy doesn't necessarily have to get to a point of having 300-year-old trees. It can be done in a landscape. It can be done in a pot. Right? It's the concept and it's the system that we're thinking of, the principles, right, of this succession. It doesn't have to get to that stage. So 3 very, very important considerations for the syntropy are the vertical occupancy, horizontal occupancy, and natural succession. Okay. This part can get a little bit confusing, and this is what really separates all the other systems from the syntropic agriculture, because usually we think of horizontal spacing, right? For farming, for monocultures, we're thinking how much space does one plant need from one plant to the other, right? 1 foot, 2 feet, whatever it may be. With the syntropic systems, we're thinking about vertical space and horizontal space and time, life cycle of the plant, right? And canopy size. And so there's a lot of considerations here. And we're gonna look deeper into this when we have our in-person planting day, because we're gonna be talking about specific plants and looking at the different spacings of them. But in general, what is really important for y'all to know is that the stratification, so the vertical occupancy of these plants, does not equal the height. Okay, it equals the sunlight requirement of each plant. And the terms that are used here are, for the stratum, are emergent, which are the plants that require the most light. And typically these are the ones that are going to be have the least amount of plants in our system, right? So 20% of our system has the emergent plants. And it gets a little bit confusing because sometimes our plants that are our emergent plants are going to be the taller ones. But even within our placenta stage, okay, we have plants that are going to be emergent, that are going to have a really high light requirement, but they're not always going to be there. So it again, it's a little bit confusing, but all I want y'all to understand is that stratification does not equal height, it equals sunlight requirement, and that our emergent plants that require most light are going to be 20% of our system when it's mature, okay? The high stratum are going to be 40% of our system. So these are plants that still require a good amount of sunlight, right? But they can tolerate a little bit of dappled shade. So they're going to generally be underneath plants that are going to require more sunlight. Medium stratum are going to be 60% of our system. So this is going to be our plants that there's going to be more of them, and they're going to tolerate, they're going to be kind of medium to low stratum. These are plants that don't require as much sunlight, so they can thrive in partial to full shade for the system when it is in abundance. Okay. Horizontal distancing is also important, and thinking about, right, how far am I spacing my plants horizontally, as we typically think of doing, and thinking of the plants at their maximum stage, but also considering that in these systems, like I mentioned, pruning is a really important part of it. So managing the system and pruning different plants when we see that spacing is being taken over, one plant is taking over another one, we either remove it or we prune one or the other. In these types of systems, they're very, very densely planted so that we can choose which plants do we want to keep and which ones do we not want to keep. Also, this is done like Ernst Gosch, when he started these systems, and a lot of what people are doing now when they're planting them is they're planting fruit trees very, very close together, and they're seeing, kind of doing like a test, right? Which one is doing the best, and which one are the other ones kind of giving their life to, and sacrificing the other ones, right? Because again, we're thinking abundance and not scarcity. A lot of the way that we think of the world, really, and what we have in our plants is like scarcity, right? We plant one avocado tree or we plant one peach tree, and it's like we want to think in abundance so that we can detach from a lot of these plants that we're planting. And again, we're thinking of optimizing photosynthesis, and we're thinking long-term dynamics. So the systems are constantly evolving and changing with these pruning practices, with the light differences as the plants start to grow. So in a forest, do we see more emergent plants or medium to low plants? And I gave y'all a clue here. If y'all want to answer, you can, but if not, that's okay. I'll answer. We see more medium to low plants, right? And a lot of these medium to low stratum plants, their leaves are typically bigger, right? They're going to have large leaves so that they can maximize their photosynthesis, right? So that they can have more light hit the leaf, right? And surface area of sunlight that is being dappled through the upper story or the taller trees. And again, systems of abundance, right? So in nature, we do not see monocultures at all. So monocultures are a symptom of human action. We think a lot of times, right, in the grocery store, right, we see the red, big, juicy tomato, and we think, wow, that is such a healthy tomato. And I want us to challenge that and say, actually, if that tomato was grown in a monoculture of, even if it's organic tomatoes, organic does not mean healthy, right? Organic still, a lot of times, they are monocrop fields of organic tomatoes that have inputs that are still synthetic organic, right? Or natural inputs that are still depleting soil, right? A lot of times these systems do not have organic material that is covering the soil, right? Because of the nature of farming in this way. And so the organic monoculture does not equal healthy, right? The plant, NPK, right? We think NPK, and really there's 58 more micronutrients that are needed for true plant health, soil and plant health. And really, organic at the grocery store is the bare minimum that we can do in order for us to be eating in a healthy way. And it's sad because it's kind of the best we have, right? We it's really hard to find a tomato that was grown in a syntropic agroecological way, right? We don't really see that. And so thinking of how can we start to shift our mindset and the way that we live and the way that we consume our food, so that we do have true health. It's kind of like if we see, a guy that's really big and bulky and has a lot of muscles, but like he's sick all the time, right? It's like that's not a true sign of health, right? It's really probably putting a lot of stuff in his body that isn't really good for him, but he looks good in the sense of what we think is somebody who's healthy, right? So thinking about the soil, thinking about the true health of our plants, and thinking about really what do monocultures do in how they damage, right? Still, even if they're organic, a lot of times in monocultures we have a big issue with, especially with like tree. I've seen a lot of these, especially in my travels, right? And even here, like monocultures of, and we see it in the outskirts of Houston, like pine monocultures, right? And there's very little that has been planted underneath these trees or that has been able to regenerate really. And a big problem that we have in agriculture is with wind, right? Because wind is actually removing energy. It's taking away energy from our systems. It's taking nutrients and water. And so wind is really one of the biggest uh, enemies kind of in agriculture. And that's why in permaculture windbreaks are so important, right? Because wind really does kind of wash away a lot of what we need. And without those understory plants, without that diversity and without those layers, the wind can't slow down. So it really is very damaging. And also thinking about rain, right? We think, well, rain is the best thing ever, and of course it is. So grateful for rain. But if we don't have plants that kind of filter the rain, it can also compact soil, right? If there's not a lot of organic material where the rain can absorb, or different leaves where it can dapple so that it doesn't come down at such a force where it's compacting soil. So thinking about these things is really important when we eat, right? And so in this way, the word syntropy, right? It's the opposite of entropy. Okay, so entropy is moving towards disorder, breakdown, chaos, and it's really the loss of energy, like I've talked about. Syntropy, on the other hand, is moving towards growth, order, and vitality through diversity. So we're accumulating energy. And that's why all the biomass and all of the abundance of plants, it's like we're really creating this abundance of energy where we kind of are not used to it, right? Humans are not used to that because we have lived in scarcity. And so moving away from competition towards collaboration is another characteristic of syntropy, and optimizing plant function. So energy towards growth. And what I mean by this is optimizing plant function is that we a lot of times we'll plant in soil, we'll make a little hole, right, for the plant or for the tree, and then plant maybe one or two times bigger than our pot and then expect the tree to do its job. But really the tree there, if it's all around where we're planting, it's planted in compacted soil, then it's going to spend a lot of its energy trying to break up that compacted soil instead of putting the energy towards true growth of the plant itself. So thinking about how can we optimize plant function and give these plants the optimal conditions for their function to flourish. And so the focus on medicinal plants has really been, so I'm an herbalist and I make herbal products and I've worked with medicinal plants, and even right, I haven't been able to grow all of the plants that I use in my products because that I would need to grow a lot. But even in researching and hearing from other herbalist friends, right, how these herbs are grown, in still in monocrop organic herbs that I've purchased, right, are grown in monocrop fields. And there's a lot of this kind of debate in the organic farming world of, do we farm and grow organically for our consumption, but then what about the ecosystems that we're degrading? And so how can we kind of, we don't, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? We don't have to degrade land to grow our food or our medicines. This is where the syntropy comes in, where it's like, well, we can actually do both. We can regenerate and grow systems of abundance that focus, whether it's medicinal plants, whether it's fruit trees, whether it's coffee, whether it's tomatoes, right? These systems have a focal, it doesn't have to be a focal plant, but focal plants that we focus on nurturing. And I'm going to get into why medicinal plants, but medicinal plants, apart from being really beneficial for us and our human health, they are incredible for soil health and for health of the ecosystem and for biodiversity. So again, we as humans in the agricultural and ecological world, we're indebted, right? We have taken way too much. And so these systems are about accelerating processes to return what we have been taking for too long and giving back more than we harvest. So we plant our organic matter, we plant our own compost. And again, a little bit of review, right? So natural succession, stratification, and distance are the main differences and the main concepts of these types of systems that we need to remember in order to create the syntropic agroforestry, right? And so remembering that vertical spacing is stratification and horizontal horizontal distance is horizontal is distance. Sorry. So why medicinal plants? I already talked about it a little bit, but we other than that, they're incredible plants and they basically need very, very little to be very, very powerful in their medicinal properties. They support soil health by having, a lot of them have deep roots and tap roots where they're supporting nutrient cycling. So their deep roots go down farther than a lot of other plants can go. They uptake minerals and phytonutrients, and then they are so abundant because they have that herbaceous plant characteristic where they produce a lot of leaves, they produce a lot of flowers, a lot of seeds. So they naturally put back those minerals through their leaves as organic matter into the soil. They also attract beneficial insects and pollinators because of a lot of the flowers that they have. They're going to enhance biodiversity, so that's going to strengthen our ecosystem resilience. They provide human and animal medicine. They naturally protect plants. So a lot of these medicinal plants are pest deterrents and also disease deterrents. So a lot of them will help with nematodes. They're going to help attract, they're going to help bring in beneficial insects that are going to be naturally, IPM, naturally hunting the other insects that are not so beneficial. They help balance the ecosystem as a whole. They also complete succession by filling in different, a lot of them are going to be low stratum, medium stratum. So they're going to be filling in those light niches efficiently. And they're dynamic accumulators, as I explained before. So they have so many benefits that are incredible, and they're so abundant that they grow very fast. So like the organic matter that they produce, they also are going to be able to be harvested very, very often and regrow very, very quickly. And so that's what we want in these systems, right? We want plants that we can harvest and that they will grow back, and that they embody that syntropy essence. And medicinal plants are exactly that. They are syntropic by nature. So this was I went to a course here on syntropic agroforestry and medicinal plants. And this is what we did, right? So we created this system, and I have the steps here of what we did. This was in Oaxaca in Mexico. And that's my teacher, one of the teachers, Nat Muget. She's incredible. I can send y'all her info. So wise, so knowledgeable. And this place is called Tierra del Sol in Oaxaca. It means land of the sun. And this place, actually, this area that we planted was, before this, it was a compacted parking lot. Okay, this is where they were parking cars, a lot of construction, a lot of trash was here. So in order to plant these types of systems, the soil has to be very loose. And typically we go down, it's about a foot and a half to almost 2 feet into the soil below and break it up and compact it, right? If the soil has been compacted. The idea is for the soil to be very, very loose from the very beginning. And this is obviously a no-till system, a no nothing system once it's done. But the first stage, typically we do have to, if especially if it's very compacted soil, there's one moving of the soil, one tillage, one till or one decompaction of soil at the very, very beginning. Okay, so Tierra del Sol also, this place is amazing. If anyone is ever in Oaxaca, it's about 45 minutes from the main city. And it's a place that is in a really dry valley where most people are growing monocrop fields of agave to make tequila and mezcal, and you see this place from above or from far away, and it's literally a forest of just so much abundance. And they have medicinal syntropic systems that they have planted, that are 4 or 5 years old. This place is about 20 years old, but it's incredible how green it is compared to all of its surroundings. And so this system that we did was a medicinal focused system for the new labs that they created to make herbal products. So this was heavy focus on medicinal plants. And as you can see, step one is decompact the soil. So for a couple of weeks, they were actually doing this because it was completely compacted. So of course, that's a lot of, and that's another thing about syntropic systems, is that initially, at the very beginning, it is very labor intensive because you want to consider, right, how is your soil condition, right? We want to test the soil always before planting. So what does my soil actually need? Then we do at the Ernst Gosch, he was kind of like extreme in that he said like absolutely no inputs ever. But at the beginning, like my teachers and the people that I've learned from, it's like, well, you have to know where your soil is at, and in order for you to accelerate the process even more, what are the minerals that are lacking, what are the nutrients that are lacking, and adding those at the very beginning, and then allowing the system to never again needing to have inputs. So we added rock phosphate, and I think that's it. Rock phosphate and chicken manure was what we added at the very beginning. Once the soil was loose and they had tested the soil, they whoops. Am I still here? Okay. They then we added those and we mixed it to the whole area, right? You see in stage two is where we started to make the pathways. So all those little pieces of wood and bamboo, those are the paths. So first we aerate the soil and loosen it up. Then we add the amendments necessary. And then we make and shape the paths, right? And this was a design that they had made previous to to doing this. So all the paths were already staked, and we went in and we made these pathways. And you can see that they're pieces of wood and bamboo. That this is very characteristic of syntropic systems. Also, is these pieces of wood that make the pathway so that it's still constantly feeding the soil, right? So the paths are made, then they're covered with organic material, but in every single piece of wood that you see there was touching the soil beneath it and the sides of the beds, right? So really important, and we're going to do this on Sunday. And so yeah, and then the design, right? Placing the plants, knowing their stratification and knowing their horizontal distance and knowing their life cycle, then strategically placing and doing the design of each plant, so that they can have their maximum potential for growth, and so that we know kind of the companion plantings of who goes well with who in terms of growth and life cycle. And then we covered everything. So of course, the very beginning, there's not going to be organic material that we can use from our system. So at the initial stage, you cover everything with whatever organic material we have. So we used hay, we used grass clippings here. For Sunday, we're going to be using leaves and hay. So what this is a good shout out here. Anybody that's on this Zoom that is coming on Sunday, please, if you see any bags of leaves or if you have them, please bring them on Sunday. I have a lot, but it's not going to be enough for our whole system. So here's a shout out to bring your bags of leaves or your neighbors on Sunday, please. So here are the steps kind of in the stage, right? So loosen and test soil, amend necessary, measure, mark paths and beds, place logs on the paths, shape your beds as necessary. So yeah, we'll get into more of this on Sunday. Place the plants, mulch, and then seeds after the mulch, right? So this is our site for Sunday. This is Harriet Street Community Garden. And this is a site that was nothing. And now with Urban Harvest, with the help of Urban Harvest and our partners, right, we are amending, and we're it's kind of a site where we're showing different ways of planting and growing abundance to have these systems of abundance in place. Ideally, originally, it was going to be more like a food forest, but then I spoke to Carol about the idea of planting these syntropic systems, and so we're doing a couple of rows, and hopefully maybe we can do more, but it is going to be a community site. So the idea is that the community learns and understands how to manage these systems, and then can eat and reap the benefits from them, right? And so we have already planted one row of native trees and shrubs. We planted some maples, pines. We planted elderberry and mulberry. So that row is already planted, right? What we're going to be doing is we are going to be adding two next to that row, right? We're going to, and this is another call to action for tomorrow. Carol and I and some other volunteers are going to be going to the site and prepping, because if we do all of this Sunday, there's no way we will be done in 4 hours. So we're going to be going tomorrow morning, if anyone is available, to help us remove the sod, the grass that is there, and then till the area that we're going to be working on, so that we can just get there and learn a little bit about our design and then plant. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a path in between our already planted row of trees and our new syntropic row that we're going to be planting. So we're going to till the soil. We're going to make the path. So to make the path, basically, we're going to dig out the soil that is there to be able to have enough depth for our logs to be placed in that path. And again, we want the soil to be as fluffy and loose as possible and as deep as possible. So we're going to try to get as deep as 1.5 feet. Hopefully we can do that. And then we're going to do the path, we're going to do the bed, and then we're going to do, if there's enough wood, we're going to do another path next to it. Because again, the paths are very multifunctional. They're a path that we can walk on, that we can wheelbarrow on, but they're also a path that over time is breaking down that wood so that it's feeding the system completely from below and from above, right? So we want to give, the plants as much comfort and as much ease when they're first planted to be able to grow. So these are some of the plants that we're going to be planting on Sunday. This is very exciting, guys. So we have loquat and peach trees that are going to be kind of our focal species that we're going to be nurturing, right? We have mulberry, elderberry, and beautyberry that are going to be our medium stratum trees, so they don't have as much light requirement as the loquat and peach. And this is another important thing. When you plant these systems, you have to think about planting plants that don't have all the same requirements, right? We have to have different light requirements, different sunlight requirements, and different needs, so that we reduce the competition and we go more into the collaboration. So we're also going to have Mexican mint marigold, which is my favorite plant. It's a really incredible medicinal plant. All of these are medicinal, right? With our fruit trees, they're fruit trees, but the leaves of loquats are amazing for respiratory support. They're anti-inflammatory. They're soothing for coughs. Our peach tree is the leaves are digestive. They're calming. They're nervine. They're also really great for overthinkers in the summertime, and they're cold, right? It's a cold plant. So placing the leaves on your head, it really helps like overthinking and helps headaches. Mulberry leaves are some of the best blood building, antioxidant, blood sugar support. We have elderberry that is incredible immune friend, antiviral. The flowers are really amazing for fever support. Beautyberry, which is a natural insect repellent. Mexican mint marigold is an incredible plant. I know I'm saying incredible a lot because they all are incredible, but Mexican mint marigold is a native plant to Mexico and also Texas. It's a digestive aid. It's a nervine, and in Oaxaca, where I was, there Mexican mint marigold grows like fields of it grow in the mountains there in Oaxaca, and I got to see kind of the final stages of it when it was already kind of going to seed, but still seeing it pop up everywhere. It was like this, and it's this incredible plant that is it Tagiris lucida, right? It helps lift our mood. It helps our kind of our third eye open up. It helps with dreams. It's really incredible, especially for digestion. It's often used in Mexico for any type of digestive issue. We have rosemary, which is also going to be part of our system. So rosemary's main affinity is for the circulatory system. So it's a circulatory stimulant. It's a warming plant. It also helps with memory, focus, digestion. Hoja santa, which is an amazing biomass plant. So our biomass plants are going to be hoja santa, castor bean, and lemongrass. So again, remember, we have to have intentionally planted biomass, or yeah, that's the way to say it. I was thinking of another word, but biomass plants are plants that produce a lot of leaves very quickly. They're very fast growing, so that we can cut them and use them in our system as mulch, or as living mulch, and then mulch that's going to decompose. And we have turmeric, of course, anti-inflammatory. Lemongrass is an incredible digestive, also really calming for the nervous system. Calendula, incredible skin healing plant. Red clover is really amazing for hormonal support. So also really important in these systems is to have a nitrogen fixer, or many nitrogen fixers, right? Because we want to use the least amount of inputs as possible. So planting our nitrogen is going to help us immensely with our nitrogen supply. And then we have bunching onions as well. So again, we see our different layers, right? We have different stratum. This is kind of the planting chart. We're going to get deeper into this on Sunday. I want to leave some room for questions, but this is a little bit of our planting chart and the different type of timing, life cycle, stratification, and kind of their function within the system. It's really important to plant for diversity, right? So having the more diverse, the better. Really, diversity here is resilience. And so knowing how much diversity we have, the design is repetitive, right? So we're going to be planting, right, at a certain distance, right? Mexican mint marigolds are going to be planted about every 4 feet apart, right? The fruit trees are going to be planted about every 7 or 8 feet apart. So there's a specific design that we're going to look at on Sunday. But the design is repetitive in the Syntropic row, so that it's easier for harvesting, for managing, right? So we want to make this easier for the people that are managing, because the management is a huge crucial part. And unlike the food forest, where it's kind of like, well, that goes there and that goes there, and there is a design for food forest, but it's more free, it's more leisurely. This is like a very productive system. So we want the harvesting and the pruning to also be planted in a functional way, so that it's efficient. And so these are our phases of the system. Again, we're going to get into this Sunday. So just really important on on harvesting, okay, and organic material. Remember that we're harvesting for the soil, for the humans, and for the natural world, the plants of service, and to create more organic material. The pruning is a huge, crucial, important part of the system. So once the systems are established, the pruning should happen of the fruit tree should happen roughly every 40 days. So these plants are growing very rapidly, right? And the especially for the biomass plants, but also for the fruit trees, once they're mature, right? Pruning, making sure that we know how to prune and pruning practices that are creating more life and and overall resistance. So when we prune, we're actually not killing the plant. We're actually encouraging new growth and helping the plant to grow even more. And when we prune above, we're also pruning below. So the pruning happens above, but then the roots underneath, they naturally die off because, as you know, as above, so below. And when those roots start to die off, there's more microorganisms and more beneficial fungi and microorganisms that start to come to help decompose those roots. So it's actually creating more life beneath the soil and creating this kind of pulse to to increase the growth of all the other plants around the plants that we're pruning. It's pretty amazing. Um, so just to end, remembering for these systems, the concepts encourage healthy living soil for healthy living plants, which encourage healthy living humans and a healthy living society. Remembering who we are, process potentializers that we're here to help life's processes and help them to reach their fullest potential. And let's choose to positively do this by planting this system on Sunday. And so I'll end with this and we can go into some questions if anyone has them. Thank y'all so much. Should I
Thank you,
stop?
Joanna. So if you have any questions, you may unmute yourself to ask a question or raise your hand or post in the chat. So Natalie wants to know, are there any books you would recommend to people who want to learn more about medicinal herbs and syntropic agroforestry?
So it's funny because no, because there really aren't any in English. This Syntropic agroforestry, as I said, it started in Brazil and it's kind of making its way up to it's not I mean there's very few places in the US. There's some places in Florida that are practicing syntropic agroforestry, but it is kind of this newer concept, even though it's not really new. But I was looking for books myself and I couldn't find any books in English. There's very little books on it because again it's just kind of recently coming here, so y'all getting a first view of syntropic agroforestry in the US. And it is very exciting because I do feel that it's gonna get here, right? And then that's not a negative thing, that's positive. We want this to be a way that farms start to transform their farming practices into these types of systems for abundance. But I there's not many resources, unfortunately. Books, there's videos, there's a lot of YouTube people. Some are in the US, but also other folks that have gone down to South America and have visited these types of farms that have made YouTube videos. But books, I've done my research on books and
So
there's
are the books in Spanish or in Portuguese? Because we do have, a number of Spanish speakers on
yeah,
our Zoom
they're in Portuguese.
in Portuguese.
Yeah. And they yeah, there's no, not in Spanish, not in Portuguese. There's other, I mean, there's a lot on regenerative agriculture, permaculture, right? But
Mhm.
specifically Syntropic. Yeah.
Well, which YouTubers do you suggest? Because I did take a look on YouTube and there's just a lot of content there. And so I didn't really have the time to to filter through to start to watch and compare. So if there are any that you really like, maybe you could post a link in the chat.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. And while she's doing that, Lorena wants to know what kind of leaves to bring on Sunday and really all types of leaves. They say avoid some leaves because they might be more tannic and inhibit plant growth. However, basically all of it does break down and create a lot of beneficial mycorrhizae fungi. And each type of tree leaves does produce its own type of mycorrhizae fungi for that tree. And so we're just going to have a mix basically for enriching the soil. Mostly, I just kind of look to see if the household has dogs or not. If it's a lot of leaves, that is a good sign. If it's a tiny yard and I see dogs, I'll usually pass it by. Thanks, Joanna. So, Joanna posted a link for everyone to check out.
I'm honestly kind of I haven't really seen many of the YouTube videos because I don't I mean I look at some, but I can send more to the email of people who signed up to make sure that I filter through the good ones because I honestly I've learned more in person with teachers where I've gone and learned, and it's but yes, you can look at YouTube and there are a lot of people that are doing good work. Just yeah.
Mhm. Well,
Any fallen leaves.
thank you,
Yeah.
Joanna. I did want to invite everyone again. We hope to see you on Sunday if you're able to make it, 1 to 4 p.m. And the site does not have a parking lot. It is street parking. And also for facilities, there are no bathrooms on the site. So just to be mindful of that before you arrive, that we are on a vacant lot. And finally, if you're able to make it on Friday between 11 to 2, if you want to drop in and help us rake sod, that would be great. So we will be there tomorrow prepping the site for Sunday.
Yes, please come tomorrow. We need hands.
We do have two RSVPs for tomorrow. So thank you, Keisha. Just shout out to Keisha, who's going to be there tomorrow to help us as well.
It's gonna be fun.
Mhm.
And if y'all have any questions, or want to contact me further, I'll put my email down below as well.
Thank you, everyone. So this recording, I will send out by Monday. I'll send it out when it's ready, but definitely by Monday.